Hello, and thank you for coming to my presentation today. I did visit all of the U.S. national parks, but the talk today is going to focus on the 10 most logistically challenging national parks and how I did it. Wrong direction. There we go. Why I'm here. So I've heard the greatest gift that you can give somebody is the gift of inspiration, and so I hope today's chat will inspire you to visit our national parks and protect our national parks. I'm sorry, I will get the hang of this. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I discovered a love of nature later in life. My undergrad education is in business as well as grad school with a focus on nonprofits. Most of my career has been spent in hospitality, travel, tourism, and events. Lots of logistics involved there. I am a self-proclaimed wanderlust professional, so most of my travels have been personal and not work-related. However, I'm not a stranger to moving and new experiences. As you can see, Tennessee is the 10th state I've lived in. I also love bucket lists, and if you're not sure what a bucket list is, it's a list of things you want to do before you kick the bucket or pass away. And so my first bucket list was to visit all the US states by the time I turned 30. My second one was to visit all the US national parks by the time I turned 40, which I finished last year. And then my next bucket list, because everyone says, okay, what's next? It's to visit 50 countries by 50, and right now I'm up to 37.
I want to ask your age. You probably got plenty of time.
So, for a little bit of context, I'm not an influencer, so I didn't raise money to do this. I'm not a professional photographer, which you can probably tell from some of the photos I've shared previously. I'm not independently wealthy, as I showed from the experiences I've had. I've moved a lot, and so being based in a region where there's national parks makes it easier and also cheaper to explore. I'm definitely not a national park expert. All of the visits that I've done, which I've visited the parks multiple times, I'm still only scratching the surface of what they have to offer. And then I also want to be clear that the information I'm going to share with you today was correct at the time of my visit and may have changed since. A couple tips and recommended resources. If you do read blogs, they're full of great information, but just always verify, because once again, they may have changed, whether a trail was open at one point and is no longer open now. The national park websites for each national park are the primary resource I use. It also has the most up-to-date information. Additionally, if there are seasonal closures or timed entry or permits required. Also, I have found great help via emailing the national park rangers that are located at those particular sites, because they have the most up-to-date information. And sometimes it can be hard to navigate the national park website. Another website I use frequently is called Wiki Travel or Wiki Voyage. I really like how it's broken down and has minimal ads to distract, but once again, always make sure to verify. Okay, so my inspiration for visiting the national parks, curiosity. As we all know, travel is an education. Time, I always use the mantra that you either have the time and not the money, so while you have the time, borrow the money or do what you gotta do to make it happen. I recently saw this on a shirt, that there will come a day when I cannot do this, but today is not that day. So kind of embracing that, and of course the physical and mental benefits of being in nature and the sense of awe, as well as community and connection, because the folks you meet in national parks, or just like today, connecting with people with similar interests and passions. So, what is a national park? This might seem like a silly question, but the National Park Service has over 400 units in it, and the national parks that I visited, the 63, are just one of those 20 different types. So just to give an example, this is a map of Tennessee, and so Tennessee has national battlefields, national historic trails, national parkways, and historic parks. So these are all the different designations, and I'm only focusing on this one, the big 63. Now, where are the US national parks? Of course, we all know they're in the US, but a lot of people don't realize that they are also located in the US territories of the US Virgin Islands and American Samoa. And a lot of folks have not heard of American Samoa or know where it is. And so here we are in Tennessee. American Samoa is over here, so it's actually closer to Australia than it is to the US. Okay. So this is a map of the lower 48, and then we have the Virgin Islands, of course, and Hawaii and American Samoa Alaska. A lot of people don't realize that most of the concentration of national parks in the US is to the west of the Mississippi, and it's one of the phrases that often comes to mind when you're talking about nature, that west is best, different types of mountains and scenery. So Alaska, a lot of people don't realize where it is first of all, because it's always located in a different place on the map versus where it actually is, which is to the north of Washington State and to the west of Canada. And a lot of people don't realize how large it is. So I think this is a great map to show the sheer scale and size of it, and then also where the national parks are. So California has the most national parks with 9, Alaska is second with 8, and then Utah with 5, and Colorado with 4. 7 of the 10 largest national parks are in Alaska, and Wrangell St. Elias is the largest, which is located over here. So having said that, I knew that I would need to spend some time in Alaska in order to make all those national park visits happen, and so I did. I ended up living there for a summer. I'm so sorry for the confusion. There we go. So sorry about that. So today's chat is going to focus on the most logistically challenging of the national parks. Now that you know a little bit more about Alaska, you know that's definitely why half of them are in Alaska. And one thing I want to encourage everybody to have, especially when traveling to some of these more logistically challenging parks, is to have a contingency plan or backup plan. Don't plan on just one day to do this. Make sure you have a couple days, because as you'll learn, you'll need to take float planes or bush planes to get to some of them, and if the weather isn't conducive to travel, they might cancel your tour or trip. So always add in a couple buffer days. Yeah. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is called Kenai Fjords National Park. It is close to the coast of Alaska. It's known for glaciers, wildlife, and scenery. Now, as I mentioned, I spent a summer in Alaska, so at the beginning of working, of course, and so my goal was to break even. And Alaska has a very short travel season, generally from May through September. Sometimes you can get some things happening in April or October, but generally it's going to be more limited services during that time. I went with a company called Seward Ocean Excursions, and this was the boat we used. And thankfully, since I went at the end of April, I was able to get a tour, but again, services tend to be more limited. And this is one of the cheaper parks at approximately $150 for the tour. Next up is Glacier Bay National Park. It is primarily a water-based park. A lot of folks usually visit this park on a cruise ship or on a boat tour like I did. So like I mentioned, I was based in Alaska for the summer, so I did have to take a plane and then a shuttle and then a boat tour in order to experience it. The highlights of this park are of course glaciers, wildlife, and the scenery. These are as close to actual numbers as possible, and it was approximately $1,200 traveling from Alaska, so it would be even more if you were traveling from the lower 48 or elsewhere. Wrangell St. Elias, which you've heard me mention already, is the largest national park in Alaska. Scenery is definitely one of the highlights here, as well as glaciers and mountains. I did what's called the mail run, so from Anchorage, which is the largest city in Alaska, I took 2 planes to get there. With the mail run, so this was the first plane I took, and then this was the second plane I took, and on this plane they actually put the mail that needs to be delivered to those communities. So we were on the ground for about 30 minutes in the park, and then flew back. But like I said, mountains and scenery is part of the experience in this park, so I had a great flight scene tour. It is possible to drive into this park. Near the center of the park is a famous mine that some folks stay at. It's a accommodation as well now, but I was perfectly content with my experience on the mail run. Next up is Lake Clark National Park. One of the highlights of this park is bears, as well as the scenery. I did do a day tour from Anchorage, where we took a float plane, as you'll see in the first picture, and then we took a boat tour around the lake, and then we were able to view the bears all around the coast of the lake, as well as in the water. I went with a company called Rust's Flying Service, and it was about $900 for the full day tour. Just like Lake Clark, Katmai is also known for the bears. It is home to the famous Fat Bear Week contest that the National Park Service runs, as well as it was inspiration for the Disney movie Brother Bear. For this one as well, I took a day tour from Anchorage. I had to take 2 different planes, as well as the float plane, with a company called Katmai Air. There is a hotel in Katmai National Park. It's called Brooks Lodge, and the day tour that I took included lunch at the lodge. Now, one other thing I want to mention as far as Katmai and Lake Clark, since they are big bear viewing areas, there are certain times of the season that you'll see more or less. So you'll find those on the National Park Service website as far as how many bears are generally in that area at that time. But wildlife can be unpredictable. Okay, so Gates of the Arctic and Kobuk Valley are 2 different national parks, but because they are close together, I did a flight theme tour that went to both of them and did a landing in each, so I've actually stepped foot in both parks. Now, when I first started my research, I thought I was going to have to pay $2,200 for the plane for just myself, but thankfully I was able to recruit a couple friends to go with me, so that got divided by 3 people, which was way better. We flew from Fairbanks, and then we went to a place called Bettles, which is close to the Arctic Circle, because both of these national parks are north of the Arctic Circle. So I'm thankful we got availability in September, because that is towards the end of the season, and then hunting season starts, because part of it is a preserve. But I'm thankful we were able to get a tour, as well as accommodations, since there are very limited accommodations there. And then also peak Northern Lights viewing is generally March and October, but we were able to see them for the first time. I saw them for the first time on this trip, so that was super special. The other cool thing about Gates of the Arctic and going to Bettles is there is a small visitor center there. And so, as you saw in my presentation in the beginning, I usually like to take pictures with the national park signs, but since we visited these parks via float plane, there's not national park signs in the park, so the visitor center had little signs that we could borrow and take on the plane and take pictures in the park with them. I thought that was very cool. Next up is Isle Royale National Park. So this one is not in Alaska, it is off the coast of Michigan, and it is pretty logistically challenging to get there. So again, I have approximate costs, $2,000. I was thankful to have a friend join me, so again, cut down on some of those costs. A couple things, there is one hotel on the island and you're allowed to camp. However, for this trip, I thought camping would be even more logistically challenging instead of just getting a hotel, so I went that route. I called the hotel first, found out what availability they had, and then worked backwards from there. Some folks can have traveled here via float plane, or there's a couple different ferry options from either Michigan or I believe it's Minnesota. I chose this one because I also wanted to spend some time exploring the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Next up is Virgin Islands National Park. So it's off the coast of, well, not off the coast of, it's located east of Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands has 3 main islands, St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. Some of the things to do in this national park include the scenery, snorkeling and diving, as well as some historic sites. One thing I want to warn people about visiting Virgin Islands National Park is it is in the Caribbean, and their infrastructure isn't as developed as in the lower 48. And so just go in with that expectation that certain things that you're used to here are going to be a little bit more challenging there. One of the things I learned was that the island is still recovering from lots of hurricane damage, and it's an ongoing recovery. And then 2/3 of St. John is the national park, so plenty of places to explore. If you don't do a tour via taxi like I did, some folks also charter a boat or do a boat tour. And then I had taken a plane, as you can see the yellow plane, so Spirit from Miami to St. Thomas, and then from St. Thomas to St. John is just a short ferry ride. Next up is National Park of American Samoa, and like I mentioned, this one is a bit challenging to get to because it is so far removed from the lower 48 or the continental US. I chose to visit this on my way to Australia, so it kind of made more sense going in that direction. And it is known for scenery, reefs, rainforests, and preserving Samoan culture. A lot of folks do visit this national park via a cruise ship as well, but I knew I wanted to travel there a little bit differently. So from Honolulu, I took a plane to American Samoa. It travels twice a week, and they call them flight nights. And so a lot of the community comes out and hangs out at the airport because of their family coming or friends coming to visit. It was a really cool experience. One thing I did not realize until I got there was how strong the culture and religious culture is. So they do not have flights on Sunday, so that was a little bit different than what I'm used to. And then depending on what direction you're heading in, you may be crossing the international date line and lose a date. So some things to think about. I went with this vendor called Best Tours. It was a private tour because they don't have infrastructure for group tour set up, but it was absolutely worth it. She took me all over the island, talked about her family and growing up there, as well as to the national park. Next up is Dry Tortugas National Park, which was the last national park I visited. And one of the reasons I chose to keep this for last is because although it's a challenge to get to, it's relatively close to the US. It's located about 70 miles off the coast of Key West, and you can get there two ways, via ferry or via float plane. I chose the more economically friendly option with the ferry, but a couple things to keep in mind: it does book out months in advance, generally non-refundable, and you are sailing on open ocean, so the water can get choppy, so I definitely recommend Dramamine whether you get seasick or not. And like I said, it's more fun with friends, which is why I left it to last. This is the only ferry, but some folks also charter a boat and spend time in the area. This full day tour was $220 a person, and it includes lunch as well as the fort tour, and this was a sample of the schedule. So, hopefully I've inspired you to visit and protect our national parks. If I've inspired you to give, these are two great organizations that are working towards that goal. And if I haven't inspired you to give, hopefully I've inspired some curiosity. So these are some of the most frequently asked questions I get. What's your favorite national park? It's Glacier. I love mountains and have the great fortune of working there for a summer. My least favorite national park, I know it's unpopular opinion, but it's Yellowstone, and primarily due to the crowding. It just takes away some of the joy for me. A lot of folks also ask if I have a national park passport, and that's a little book that a lot of folks use and stamp when they go to the parks. I do not, because I strive to be a minimalist. And then as far as souvenirs, the only thing I really buy are postcards, and then I use them, hang them up in whatever place I'm staying, and it reminds me of all the adventures I've been on. A lot of folks also ask if I know anyone else who has done this, and I do not. However, I do know a quasi-retired couple who I met working at Glacier National Park. They're working on visiting all of the parks in the national park system, so that's over 400. So, that's it. Thank you guys.